Hi and welcome to the fifth coding session of the Meter app. So in this session we're going to try to implement authorization and some simple user account management for users to be able to persist their own meetings. I don't have that much time since my wife is out with my daughter. They'll be home anytime soon, so I hope we manage to get through this. But we're gonna use ASP.NET Identity for a user token of issuing and authentication, and it's an OWIN middleware. If you aren't familiar with OWIN, you can Google OWIN and the Katana project. And we're gonna try to use this token-based authentication from our single page application. So to recap, we've created a simple mobile-friendly application where we can say how many people are in a meeting, what's the average salary. We can start the meter count, and we can stop, and we can store it. And this is stored to a database, but we don't have the user context information stored here since we aren't really logged in. So step one will be to be able to delete this, issue a token from an endpoint that will give us an access token. We want to be able to use this access token to talk with our API. And the guys at Microsoft has been really nice to us, so they implemented this in their startup template. So I've done a new ASP.NET project, file new ASP.NET project, and it created this template for me. So I'm going to start by stealing some code for us to be able to issue a token. So I'm going to be switching back and forth between the meter solution and the new web application. I hope it's not too confusing. This will be a partial class. Then let's just take everything in here. Just let ReSharper figure out what namespaces to include. Our DB context is called app.db context. Which actually doesn't have a create method. I'll fix that soon. We want this class as well. Where have they put this? They put it in an identity config file. Okay, let's do the same thing. Add a new class. Identity config. Right, and we haven't actually referenced the project that gives us these base classes. So we need to get the NuGet packages for this. And get the Entity Framework implementation. We're also gonna get the OWIN middleware. Still installing. Right. So we're going to copy the application user as well. And all it really does is they've put on this method called generate user identity. We're not gonna add any custom claims. We're just gonna copy this. Right. So still doesn't compile. Right. Or we might not put in an app start. Let's create a create method. Yeah, not really correct, but let's see here. Oh. Alright, so we're almost compiling here, and here you can see that we uncomment the following lines to be able to log in with third-party login providers. We're not going to do that in this session. I don't think we have time for it. So there's one more class we need to steal. Providers. Alright. Let's be consistent. At least put the classes in the right places. So just hopefully we'll be able to alt enter our way through all these compilation errors. Sweet. Right. So right. So all we need to do now is actually call the configure off method. We should be good to go. Configure off our app. Let's build this. Right, so if we try to issue a token, we should get into this method. So let's debug this. Token, just post, see what happens. Unsupported grant type. Right, so let's add a grant type, which is password. Send it. Sweet, so we don't have a username, so this should actually, oh, it's not handled very well, but that's not really our fault, is it, since we didn't actually do this implementation. But let's add a user account so we'll be able to log in. And right now we are inheriting from DB context. If you want to get the user some basic user account management, or basic, it's quite complex really, we can just inherit. Let's see where they have their code. we should just inherit identity DB context instead, which actually inherits the DB context. So right now, if we look in the database, we don't have any user tables, but we'll have them soon. So let's inherit ASP.NET DB context instead. And also, once we're added, we should add a user ID property. We have an initial migration which created a meetings table for us. So to create the new tables, just add a new migration, identity.db. And we can see that the new migration adds a couple of tables for us. And before we do anything, we should add some users as well. So if we don't have any users, let's go ahead and create a user. We're gonna need, let's see here, we're gonna need a user manager. We're gonna want to create a user application manager, which we're gonna need to pass in a store too. Alright, so let's get back to our suite method. New user store. We're gonna send in our context. Right, now should be able to just create a new user, test user. Test, right, and just pass in the test user and a password. Test 1, 2, 3, test, exclamation point. Alright, this will give us a result back. Success. Let's not care about this since we're still developing. Right, and we want to associate these meetings with our test user. Okay, so let's just do it like this. Right, our user ID. Right. So we'll build this and run our seed method. Update database. Right, let's see what we have in our database now. We have our meetings table, which has a user ID, which is null, so we didn't actually manage to create a user. Did we? Oh, we didn't. Right, we had our meetings there from the first place, so let's do this. Let's just delete the database and recreate it. Right, so now they're associated with a user account. Right, so now we should be able to log in by passing these parameters from our Postman client. So username, test, was it test user? No, test, password. And obviously this should only be allowed over HTTPS, but for development purposes we allow insecure HTTP calls. So we haven't started. Right, so we have an access token, and we want to be able to use this. So right now we can call API meetings to a get and get data without actually passing our token, which isn't good. So we're gonna come out to our meeting controller. We're gonna tell it to only allow authorized calls. If we do this now, authorization has been denied for this request. So let's take our token, authorization, barrier, and our token. Got the quotation mark there. Let's see if it goes better. Sweet, so we got the data. Let's just see if this actually works, if it swallows everything. No, it doesn't, so that's good. Alright, so we actually managed to do this part. We can get an access token and we can use it to call, to make secure calls to the API, or at least authorized calls. So we managed to do this from our Postman client. Let's create a login form for our Meter app and do it from there as well. So we can see now that we can't actually get our meetings from the server. We are making unauthorized calls. Right, so let's create a simple form. Forms. We have a sweet login example here. Let's see here. Form. See a login form. I think they have a nice example here. Form elements, that's not actually what we're looking for. Let's search for pop-up. Basic pop-up. sign in. Oh, sweet. So this is what we want. Let's take this. Put in our page. Want to link to it. Oh, that's the link. We already sign in. Let's try it out. Sign in. Actually want it to be through right position. Right. And we get the form up. Okay, so when we submit and click, we want to log in. Should be a method on the view model. And let's bind these values to the scope. Once we're logged in, let's add a login method. No, let's not upgrade now. Let's hard code in the user until we actually get it to work. Right. So username. What was the password? Oh. Right. And here we want to do the login. Let's close the dialog. Just see that we actually get here. So I'm gonna do a really ugly thing here. This is temporary, but I'm actually gonna find this pop-up in the DOM. jQuery pop-up close from JavaScript. Right. So we're gonna close that dialog from the view model. So we should actually, I know we should bind this, but we're just doing this for the sake of this demo. So we close the pop-up. All right. See that it works as expected. Sign in, and we close the pop-up. All right. So now we want to access the token endpoint path and use it when we do the call, so we don't get this unauthorized error. So let's create authentication service. Auth service. Let's do this whole thing here. And remember to add it to the index file. Let's actually export. Let's do a factory. Don't know what we want yet. We're just gonna return our factory method. Oh, I did the storage as a service. Let's do this as a factory. Just for the hell of it. Auth service. Auth service. Right. And I think we want to store some. We know we want to store the login information, the token. So in the storage service, I think we're gonna extend this interface to get auth settings. Let's add a new model. Is authorized. And token. Right, so my daughter and fiance just came home. I'm just gonna pause for a little bit and I'm gonna continue in a second. Alright, so I'm back. I have a couple of more minutes. So let's try to finish this up. Right, where were I? I think we added a model. Yeah, okay. So we want to be able to get our auth settings, and we want to be able to save auth settings as well. Let's continue with this pattern. Meter auth settings key. Not responding. Please don't crash. So this is what happens when you don't upgrade to the latest TypeScript. Doesn't look good. Not gonna need this anymore. Let's close it down. We're probably gonna need to restart this, the IDE as well. Okay, I've been very patient here. Let's kill it. so did it save? Yeah. Okay, let's try this again. Add a meter off settings key. Copy paste these methods, cross our fingers. Yay, it worked. Off settings. Default should be that we aren't authorized. Perhaps an empty string token. Meter off settings key, and we try to get the settings. If we didn't have them stored, we new up the off settings model. Alright. Now, once we can store and get these from our local repository, let's get back to our off service here. Storage service. Let's create a login function. Get the username, string, and password. Right. So I'm writing C# all day long, so I usually add a semicolon to the end when it shouldn't be one. Alright, so let's log in. To be able to log in, we're gonna need the HTTP service as well. And let's actually, I want to be able to chain up some methods in our controller, so I'm gonna resolve the queue service as well. So let's create our data we want to pass. It should be a form URL encoded, so grant type equals password and username equals username. Let's create a deferred call. So and return the promise here. Right, so let's make the call. HTTP post to our token endpoint. We want to pass the data this, and we want to pass the content type header. Tell it that it's X form. How do you say it? www form URL encoded. Right. So success. Let's resolve the response. On error. It's rejected. Right. So now we should be able to post to log in, and we can pass username and password to it. So let's resolve. Right. First of all, let's specify the dependencies. To the auth service was the storage service, and HTTP service and the queue service. I think, right? Storage service, HTTP, and the queue service. Right. So when we want to resolve it, we want the dependency to auth service in our meeting controller. Right, we're doing it this way here. Auth service. I don't really have time to create an interface for this, so just bear with me. I'll type it as any. Can undo this. Right. So now we should resolve the auth service. And in our login method, finally, auth service, we want to log in with this scope username. I want to pass this scope password, and then function I don't actually remember to specify. I think the first function is the success function. Let's see here what we get. This is defined. Return a promise. We have the success callback. We have the success callback first, and then the error callback. Right. So, a meetings controller, success response to something, function error response to something. I can see how this is formatted. Something like this, I don't know. Right, we just want to close the dialog on success. Otherwise, we maybe want to show some error message. So let's just login error. Define it on the scope. Right. I have a login message, and if anything goes wrong, we probably want to display it. Oh, I can see here we need to store self. Alright, and here we want to store our token and fetch data. Right, so let's see if we can display this error message first thing. Please sign in. Oh no, here. Style font. Login error message. Should only ng show. Oh, if we need that. Okay. So if we try to log in with the wrong credentials, we should get an error message. Let's try. Oops. Okay. Let's try again. Start. Right. We're still getting this unauthorized result. Let's try to sign in. Wrong credentials. Fail to log in. Right. And if we sign in. Right. So quite surprised that it's worked so easily, actually. So let's store this. Let's fetch the data. Okay, so we can store the login information in our login off service. So storage service, save off settings. New off settings model. So right, and our access token, of course. So we can store it. Let's actually do it like this. Authentication. Let's have an object. So a function. Is what we were calling them again? Is authorized and token. authorize false. And update this object here as well. Right, so now in our meetings controller, we actually don't want to get these meetings until we have successfully authenticated ourselves. So see, I can't really decide what to do here. I think I want to expose this the authentication properties here on the scope, which I created in the auth service. This we should get it from our auth service. We need to define it on the scope. So if we are authenticated, did I call this authorized? I'm actually confused there. I should really use TypeScript is authorized. Right, if we are authorized, then get the meetings. And we want to do this from here as well. Alright, so we're going to try to fetch them when we are authorized. So we try to use this code now. Let's get authenticated, and we still get the unauthorized error. That's because we're not actually passing in the the access token. So we can do this in two ways. So we can pass in here headers, authorization header. So it's a barrier token, and this scope authentication, pass in the token here. And this is quite cumbersome to do for every request. Now this is a fairly small app, so we don't actually use the HTTP service on so many places, but we want to do this in another way. I'm going to show how in a while. We're just going to try to see if this works. Right, so we don't try to get the data until we sign in. We still get the unauthorized Let's see what we try to do here. I don't know if you're actually using, if the access token has been updated here. Okay, so interesting, didn't work. Whoops. Let's put a breakpoint there. Let's sign in again. Let's see what the scope is. We have the token. Oh, it's called token, not access token. So we should really be using TypeScript here, but just bear with me here. I don't know why this doesn't actually show me. Oh, there's the breakpoint. Right, so we sign in, let it go, and voila, we don't have the, we actually fetch these from the database. So we got rid of the unauthorized message. So if we start, stop, and we try to store, we'll still get it, since the store call, we don't pass in our token. So I want to write an request interceptor that will actually do this for us for each HTTP call, with us actually needing to specify it for every single call. I think I still have some time, so let's do that. Let's add a new TypeScript file called auth_interceptor. And do everything we've done for the other files. Whoops, jumped up when I formatted the document. Auth_interceptor. I'm gonna do something similar. Let's Google how it should look like. Request interceptor. I googled this so many times I can't seem to remember how to define them. Right, so here to register a factory, and there are some methods we can put on this factory, and we'll intercept each request and add the header. So, right. Auth_interceptor. Request. Right, so here we want to look at the headers and add the barrier token that we have stored. So for that we're going to need to have our storage service. Off settings. Let's get the off settings, and if we are authorized, then we want to add a header. Authorization header. Let's copy the code from here. Not that much to copy, but it actually did more damage than save time. We'll add it. Right. So now we have an interceptor, and we added the authorization header, and now we just need to hook this up. I'm going to configure this. We do it in the config. Okay, so in main, off interceptor, and need the storage service interceptor, and in config, let's Google this. Let's copy paste this. The HTTP provider, and we're gonna push in our off interceptor. Alright, so my daughter is back again, so now I'm gonna pause for a little while, and hopefully I'm gonna be able to finish this once she's put to bed. Alright, so I'm back. The family's sleeping, and I'm gonna try to wrap this up. Right, so let's see if I remember what I was doing. Yeah, we added our off interceptor to HTTP providers interceptors. Right. So if we have done this correctly now, we shouldn't need this piece of code that adds our authorization barrier token header. We're doing this if we're authorized. We're doing it once again here when we're logged in. Let's sign in. Yeah, we successfully fetched the data, and now we're using our interceptor instead. So I just noticed that this sign in button still says sign in, even though we are signed in. So let's bind that up to authorization, what we're calling it, authentication is authorized. ng show we're not authorized. Right, and let's have a sign out button. Yeah, it still says sign in. Don't need this. Let's see here. Sign out. Seems like we're not really remembering that we have already authenticated ourselves. So each time I refresh the page, I get that we are not authorized. Let's see what happens. Okay, so we're not authorized here. Yeah, and that's of course that's because we're initializing it with the wrong values. So let's get this from the storage service. So this is a bit inefficient right now, but what the heck. Off data. So now I have the sign out button. Should perhaps change the icon. So now we can also we'll be able to delete some meetings now as well. Delete, no error, and if we take a look in the database and refresh, we have deleted the meeting. So sweet, we can actually sign in. Oh yeah, sign out. We haven't hooked sign out up. Let's put a let's log sign out or log out, and we should just set these variables. We could add watches to these variables, but it's overkill for now. Log out. Right. Let's just call this method from our controller. Right. So refresh this. press sign out. It seems to have a breakpoint there. Okay, now sign out. And now we can't delete the meetings. And we sign in. And we were able to delete it. So this works pretty well. There's one more scenario that I would like to cover, and that's when this access token times out, we will get an unauthorized code when we try to use an expired token. So to handle expired tokens, I like to handle them globally in an interceptor. So if we take a look at the documentation here, let's see here. Here's the interceptor. We have a response error. Method that we can override and do something if we get an error. For that, we're gonna need the queue service. So let's resolve that. Queue NGI service. And let's not forget to add it here as well. I'll just take this code. Response error as a function. Okay, can't recover isn't actually anything we're gonna implement. Yeah, so here we can take a look at the status code. So if the status is 401, means that yeah, we've gotten the 401 message from the server, then we have probably a token that is timed out. Then we're gonna just log out, for instance, force the user to log in again. Log. Let's just see if we manage to hit this breakpoint. Response error, rejection. I don't actually remember if the property is called status or not. So a simple test here would be that let's use an invalid token, and we should actually be rejected immediately after login. So refresh the page, put the breakpoint in here. Let's sign in. Alright, so we got a response error, which is great. And the rejection object, yeah, the property is called status. Excellent. So we should log error. Alright. Let's do something more meaningful in there and just log out. So let's resolve the off service and just call the logout function. And we're gonna need to resolve it. Service. Oh right, of course we've created a circular dependency. So how do we solve this? Let's get the injector instead. Then in the auth service, interceptor factory, get the injector, and resolve auth service for ourselves. Right. So this should fix the problem. Let's see our injector. I think it's called that. Injector. Okay, so let's see why it didn't work. Let's put a breakpoint in there. Right, and the injector. Alright. Seems like it's a bit late for me to code right now, but obviously we should resolve the auth service instead. Refresh the page, and this should obviously work a lot better. Do we have our auth service? Yep, and we have logout function, which we'll call, and we are logged out. So when the token expires, we're gonna hit the response error function, and if the status code is 401, we're gonna log out. So that's pretty neat. Let's remove this so the code actually works. So now we're logged out. We can sign in. We're signed in. We can do stuff. We can store it. We can sign out. And we are doing it by using authorized requests. Right. So one thing that we haven't addressed yet is, I was gonna show you the user ID column here. When I stored this last meeting that I stored, right, I actually need to sign in first. Maybe we should disable some buttons if we aren't authorized. I'm gonna leave that for a later implementation. When we hit store and get a new post, we don't actually save the user ID that's logged in. So we're gonna address that problem on the server side now. And I think that's gonna be the last thing I'm gonna do in this screencast. It took me some more time than I actually counted with. Alright, so in our meeting controller, first of all, when we fetch all our meetings, we only want to fetch our meetings, not everybody else's meetings. So we have a variable here, or a property identity, and we are authenticated, which we will be, otherwise we won't get here into the controller. We can go ahead and get user ID. This will give us the GUID that is stored in the user's database. So get all should actually, let's refactor the signature here. Get all should take a parameter that is user ID. Here leave the code not compatible. So in our implementation repository here, we're where user ID equals our user ID, right? And here we're gonna pass in our user ID. All right, and same thing when we're saving. So we don't want everybody else to be able to save a meeting for us. Now we can't actually update on meetings, so save or update is pretty much always a save, never an update. But anyways, let's add a new method called getById. Actually do that in the delete method. Right. So now in our controller, we check if it's a new meeting. So repository getById. It's actually what we're doing in the save or update method. Let's see the implementation. So pretty much, I want to move out that logic to here, since we don't want anybody to be able to update somebody else's meeting record. So existing, and if existing isn't null, and that existing user ID is actually ours, let's do it like this. If it isn't null, then we're going to check. Then we're going to check the. So let's let me think for a second here. So if it is ours, then we just want to save or update it. No, this isn't gonna get. Let's do it like this. So if it isn't ours, we're trying to update somebody else's record, and then we want to return bad request. Let's move this up. Right, we're trying to update somebody else's record. Otherwise, let's not rely on the client setting the user ID. We'll just set the user ID here. And we'll save it. Alright, and we want to delete something. Existing, let's get it. And once again, then if we are null, not found, if it isn't ours, so return bad requests. So I should actually write some unit tests for this, but I think I'm gonna address that in a separate screencast. Otherwise, let's see what it. Let's delete it. Repository delete. This actually will get it again, but doesn't matter. So this should always be okay. So if managed to delete it. Return OK. All right. So let's build. And if we store a new meeting now, refresh the database. Okay, so it's still null. So why is that? Let's put a breakpoint here. All right. We're not actually setting it here. So I'm not really satisfied with this code, but it will have to do for now. Start, stop, store. All right. And we got the user ID. Sweet. So what we saw here, a couple of records disappeared. That's because they exist in my local storage, but they don't exist on the server. But that won't actually be a problem once this is in production. All right, so I'd like to do one last thing, and that's to actually disable or delete. We probably want to be able to delete from local storage and store to local storage, but not do it if we're not signed in. I'm going to leave that as for a later exercise. Yeah, I think we're done here. I'm pretty satisfied. We have the login functionality. We can sign in. If we give the wrong credentials, we get an error message. Sign in. And we can communicate with the API in a secure manner, even though it's not over HTTPS right now. And we can log out. Right, so I think in the next and probably the last screencast for this series, I'm gonna add login. Here we don't clear the message. I'm gonna add login functionality for third-party providers. I'm thinking we're gonna use Facebook login. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, perhaps we'll do a session on unit testing the API as well, and a separate session for unit testing the client. So error message, managed to log in, sign out, sign in, no error message. Alright, bug fixed. Alright, so I hope you guys learned something, and I'll see you in the next session. Bye.